What's up, guys? Welcome back to another edition of the Quick Bricks NBA DFS podcast, brought to you by the good guys over at Fantasy to Gens. As always, S. Mitchell here, Sean Mitchell at S. Mitchell17, sorry, on Twitter. Hopefully everybody is enjoying your Friday. We have a nice big 10-game slate on tap for tonight. Have an early game at 2 o'clock. Not going to cover that one. Just going to cover the 10-game main. Lots to talk about, so I want to go ahead and hop into it. Go ahead and start with game one, Grizzlies at the Pistons. We have the Detroit Pistons here as a 2.5-point home favorite. We don't have a total. Obviously waiting the Andre Drummond news. That's something obviously we would like to get. Memphis coming in as the second fastest team over their last 10 games. Detroit is the 20th fastest over their last 10. Game number two, we have the Celtics going into Orlando to face the Magic. We have the Magic here as a minus 1.5-point home favorite. No total on this one as well. Jaylen Brown news we're waiting on. Obviously, that is a big key part for the Celtics. As far as the pace goes, Boston 12th over their last 10. Orlando 22nd. A little bit of a pace-up spot here for Orlando. Game number three, we have Raptors going into New York to take on the Knicks. We have the Raptors coming in as a 7.5-point road favorite, 215.5 on the total. Toronto 18th over their last 10 in terms of pace, and the Knicks are 17th. Knicks have slowed down a little bit here lately. Nuggets at the Pelicans. New Orleans comes in as a 3.5-point home favorite. We have a nice big 231 total on this one. Looks to be the second highest on the board at the current moment. And for big reason, obviously, Denver coming in as the 25th fastest over their last 10 games. New Orleans is third. So obviously a nice big pace-up spot here for the Nuggets. The Nuggets are still depleted with injuries, so that one will be pretty interesting. Game 5, we have the Kings going into Chicago to take on the Bulls. Chicago minus 2.5 here, 221 on the total. A pretty nice total on here, about fourth highest on the board. Kings and the Bulls. Actually, Sacramento has ran with the sixth fastest pace over their last 10, which is really interesting. Chicago 21st, so you get a good little pace-up spot here for Chicago. Where Sacramento has come with the pace, I'm not real sure. Teams tend to do that every once in a while, though, so that one's interesting. It has a nice total on it, and it has a lot of good pieces. Game 6, we have the Clippers at the Heat. The Clippers coming in as a 2.5-point road favorite here in Miami. No total. Obviously, it looks like Paul George has already been ruled out. The Heat have a bunch of questionables. Goran Dragic, Kendrick Nunn, Jimmy Butler. All those guys are questionable right now, so that one is obviously something we're going to be watching for, monitor those statuses. And, you know, the Clippers will get Kawhi back. So he had his day off. He's going to be back. He will play. Obviously, he's going to be a player that we're going to want to target. The Clippers running with the ninth fastest pace over their last 10 games. Miami 29th. Massive pace-up spot here for Miami. Game 7, Rockets at the T-Wolves, the game that everybody will be looking at. For good reason. You know, you have Houston coming in here as a 4-point road favorite here in Minnesota, 235 on the total, highest on the board. Houston running with the fifth fastest pace over their last 10, Minnesota 10th. Really nice fast-paced game here. Has a lot of pieces we'll look to play as well. Hawks at the Thunder, the 8th game on the slate. We have OKC coming in as a 10.5-point home favorite here against Atlanta. No total. Waiting on the Trae Young news. Going to see if he's going to play. That one's obviously a big one. Thunder could easily run away with this game. Obviously, a big point spread. It looks like they're not really expecting Trae Young to play, or they're just not giving them, you know, any credibility here at all. For good reason. The Hawks are really just not a good team this year. Game 9, Suns at the Spurs. San Antonio minus 4.5 here at home, 229 on the total. Phoenix 14th over their last 10th in terms of pace. San Antonio 15th. So a decent pace game here. Both of these teams have been right around the top 10 in terms of pace on the season, so this one will be really interesting. I like this game quite a bit as well. Then your late night hammer, you have the Pacers going into Golden State. Indiana minus 5.5 here, no total. Indiana 26th in terms of pace over their last 10. Golden State is 7th. Golden State's been running with a lot of pace lately. I'm not really 100% sure why there's not a total on this one. I'm not really sure who they're waiting on. Looks like everybody, or Malcolm Brogdon, it looks like has already been ruled out. That's the only thing that I could see. As far as, you know, on the Warriors side, everybody looks to be good to go. D'Angelo looks good. Draymond looks good. So not just 100% sure why there's no total on that one, but that one will be a total we want to see. Obviously, it's a really big pace-up spot here for Indiana, and there's some spots we're going to want to, you know, we're going to want to play in this game. So with that being said, let's hop right into the positionals. We'll obviously start with the point guard spot, where we will kick it off with Russell Westbrook at 10.4, over 60 fantasy points in his last 4, 34 more minutes in his last 11 of 12. Minnesota is allowing the fifth most to that point guard spot over their last 10 games, and he has carried a 30.5% usage rate over his last 5. Russell has put up a couple triple doubles lately. He's been outplaying Harden, shockingly enough. I know that everybody's going to gravitate to Westbrook, and then we're going to get a Harden 80-pointer. It's just bound to happen. But this is a good spot, obviously. Minnesota shipped off Jeff Teague. Shabazz Napier has secured the point guard spot. I don't believe that he can hang with Russell Westbrook. So, again, Russell is barely over 10K. We've finally seen his price go over the 10K mark, finally. So, he's an interesting play at the top spot. Obviously, if Trae Young plays at 9.4, he's got a bruised thigh, sat out last game. Not real sure how his status is going into tonight. They're not giving, again, the Hawks are not really getting a lot of love here. They're almost an 11-point dog, even with Trae Young seemingly looking like he could play. Nonetheless, over 50 in 5 of his last 6 on the road, 32.5% usage rate in his last 5 on the road as well, and he's put up over 56 in 3 of his last 5. So Trae Young has been really good. Obviously, probably not the best spot on the road here against the Thunder. But if he does play, you could typically get him at really low ownership tonight on this slate. Because nobody, I think, is going to go there. D'Angelo Russell at 7.8, 28 minutes last game, put up, let's see here, 44, 54, and 50 in his last 3 games. 21, 27, and 21 field goal attempts in his last 3 is very encouraging. Obviously, no Brogdon here for Indiana, which is good news. He'll get Aaron Holiday likely. And then he's carrying a 31.7% usage rate over his last 3 games, or last 5, sorry. So DAR, even though it was a blowout last game, he only played 20 minutes, didn't have a really good game. I believe that obviously we're going to hope that the Warriors can stay in this one. They're not really a big dog. They're at home. Indiana is missing Malcolm Brogdon, so DAR is definitely in play at 7.8. Derrick Rose at 7.6 has played 30 and 34 minutes in his last 2. Obviously very encouraging for him, even with Reggie Jackson making his return and playing 19 minutes. Over 40 fantasy points in 5 of his last 10, carrying a 30.3 usage rate over his last 5. He's went for 33 or more fantasy points in 8 of his last 9. So Derrick Rose has been playing really well, obviously. He got voted to the All-Star game. Good things for him. I'm really proud of the dude. He's been one of my favorite players forever. Glad to see him come through the struggles. And playing really well. Playing 30 minutes again is really good. I don't know if we can count on that every single night. Nonetheless, it's a good spot here against the Grizzlies at home. We know they've struggled against the point guard spot. So Derrick Rose at 7.6. Chris Paul at 7.4 is really, really interesting, and it's probably one of my more favorite plays at the point guard spot. 37, 50, and 47 fantasy points in his last 3. Atlanta is allowing the most fantasy points to that point guard spot over their last 10 games. 36 or more in his last 4 or 5 at home. 21.2% usage rate at home in his last 5 games. And he's carrying a 127.8 offensive rating in those 5 games at home. It's pretty massive. He's been playing really well. His offense has been really good. And he's put up big numbers. And Atlanta is not very good, especially if Trae Young is out. That's even going to be better for him. Nonetheless, you have to take into account for the blowout factor. Moving along, Lonzo Ball at 7-1, 49.5, 56.5, 33 fantasy points in his last 3 at home. Denver allowing the 10th most of that point guard spot over their last 10. With Jamal Murray out, they've had to start Monte Morris. Monte Morris is not exactly the greatest defender. All the while, 117.9 offensive rating, 34.7 assist percentage, and an 8.6 rebound percentage here at home over his last 5. Lonzo's been doing a little bit of it all. That's good news. He's only 7.1. He's playing good minutes. I'm totally fine with Lonzo Ball tonight here against Denver at home. Dennis Schroeder at 6.5. Obviously, just mentioned with the CP3. Atlanta allowing the most to that point guard spot. This is a revenge spot. Schroeder gets to face his old team. We know that he could get all the blowout run as well, so Schroeder would likely probably be the better play here. 35 or more in his last 4 or 5. 23.9% usage rate over his last 5, and he's put up 40 or more fantasy points in his last 3 or 5. Dennis Schroeder's been playing really well. Continues to see good usage. Continues to see good minutes. He's played over 30 minutes just about every game. And again, it's just a really great matchup. Elfrid Payton at 5.5 is, I guess, is a player that nobody's talking about. Over 32 fantasy points in his last three straight. He's played 28, 32, and 32 minutes in those three as well. Over his last three, he's had 5 total blocks, 1 steal, 8 or more points, 6 or more rebounds, and 7 or more assists. So he's really getting close to those triple-double numbers, and he's putting up good defensive stats as well. Shockingly, we know that Elf Payton is not exactly the best defender or the best defensive player, but nonetheless, he's playing well. Have to give him kind of props. Over 30 fantasy points in his last three straight. He's only 5.5, so take that how you want. I think he's a good tournament play. Moving along, Shabazz Napier at 5.3. As I mentioned earlier, he's secured that point guard spot with them shipping off Jeff Teague. 29 and 31 minutes in his last 2 games. He's put up 24.3, and then last game he put up 36.3 fantasy points. Obviously, Houston, we know, is not very good on defense. They are allowing the third most to that point guard spot over their last 10, so it's a really good spot for Shabazz here at 5.3. His price really hasn't caught up yet. Go ahead and plug him in. Aaron Holiday obviously should get the start from Malcolm Brogdon at 4.5. Golden State allowing the second most fantasy points to that point guard spot over their last 10. He put up over 35 fantasy points in 5 games whenever he saw 30-plus minutes without Brogdon earlier in the season. Excuse me. Sorry, snotty guys. My bad. So Aaron Holiday at 4.5 is in a good spot here against Golden State on the road. Reggie Jackson, if you want to go there at 4.5, 14 field goal attempts in 19 minutes. He took 7 3-point attempts as well, which is encouraging. Like I said, he only played 19 minutes, but he put up 37 fantasy points. Gets a nice pace spot here with Memphis at home. Obviously, he's probably still a good ways away from getting back to his 25 to 28 minute range, but it was very encouraging to see his game back. So, I'm not saying you have to play Reggie, just wanted to point that out to keep him in your back pocket. Brandon Goodwin at 4K. If no Trae Young, he played 20 minutes last game, put up 29 fantasy points. He should get all the blowout run as well. So Brandon Goodwin at 4K, I think, is obviously a guy you can play tonight against OKC. Dennis Schroeder is not very good on defense. So rolling out the shooting guard. Jumping over to shooting guard, I should have said. James Harden at 11-1. We know that, I don't have to sit here and talk about James Harden. He hasn't had the best of games lately. He's still taking 17, 18 shots, taking 10, 12, 13 plus three-point attempts. He's put up 61 and 81 in his last 2 on the road, so keep that in mind. And he's due for a monster game. He really hasn't had a good one here in a few games, so look out for Harden tonight. His price has come down. Zach LaVine at 8.8 gets a nice pace-up spot here again with Sacramento, who's running with the 6th fastest pace over their last 10 games. And they are also allowing the 6th most fantasy points to the shooting guard spot over their last 10. LaVine has put up 35, 69, and 53 in his last 3 at home. He's got a 33.5% usage rate in his last 3 at home as well. Playing really good on his home floor lately. So Zach LaVine at 8.8 I think is very fine. Devin Booker at 8.7. Only played 30 minutes last game. It was a blowout against Boston. He didn't have a good game. Put up 53 fantasy points versus same San Antonio team 2 games ago. 34.1% usage rate. 69, 41, and 56 in his last 3 on the road. So Devin Booker was really white hot there for a while. He kind of cooled off a little bit, but I'm not jumping off the ship just yet. He just showed that he put up 53 against the same San Antonio team, but it was at home 2 games ago. Going into San Antonio now, it should have a pretty decent. The total in this game is 229. It's the 3rd highest game on the board at the moment. So Booker at 8.7, I still think I'm fine with. DDR on the flip side at 7.9. Put up 45 against the same Phoenix team 2 games ago in Phoenix. He's put up 46, 52, 38, 38, 42, 46.3 in his last 6 at home. Again, this is a good, nice flow game here. This should see good pace. So DDR at 7.9, totally fine with. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander against the Hawks, who are allowing the number 1 most fantasy points to that shooting guard spot over their last 10. He's put up a double-double in his last 4 of 6. He's only 7.8 tonight. He's put up over 38 fantasy points in his last 6 of 7, and he's played 35 or more minutes in his last 8 straight. SGA is a great play tonight. Obviously, again, the blowout factor. Fred VanVleet at 7.7. His price is coming back up a little bit. Over 43 fantasy points in his last 3 of 4. He's put up 41 or more in his last 4 of 6 on the road. Good spot for Fred VanVleet tonight. He's actually kind of overshadowed Kyle Lowry lately since he returned. He's taking lots of shots. So Fred VanVleet is obviously one that we like against the Knicks here tonight. Drew Holiday at 7.4. He gets Denver at home tonight. Denver is dealing with a slew of injuries. One to obviously Gary Harris at the shooting guard spot. He is questionable tonight. So he's played 32 and 35 minutes in his return. He's put up 52 in his first game back against Memphis, and he's still really cheap. It's going to be a nice pace game here tonight. I really like some Drew Holiday at 7.4. He's just really cheap. Andrew Wiggins at 7K is obviously also really cheap. Just put up 46.3 last game against Chicago. Gets Houston's D tonight at home. 46.3 and 52.5 in his last 2 of 3. 31 or more minutes in his last 6 straight. So Andrew Wiggins is obviously one we will look at as well. Marcus Smart is one we got to keep in our back pocket as well. Obviously, if Jaylen Brown sits, he should likely see loads of minutes again. He's 5.9. Orlando allowing the 8th most of that shooting guard spot over their last 10. He's put up 31 or more fantasy points in his last 3 or 4. So Marcus Smart has obviously been playing really well as well. Norman Powell at 5.8. I've been on the Norman Powell train since he returned. He's been playing really well. He's put up over 30 fantasy points in his last 5 of 6. He's played 25 or more minutes in his last 6 straight. Over 20 real points in his last 5 of 6 as well. So Norman Powell, obviously, on the other side of Fred VanVleet there. Not other side, but, playing a little bit in the spell. Dylan Brooks at 5.7, 54, 32, and 43 in his last 3 or 4. 24.6% usage rate in his last 5. Gets a good spot here against the Detroit defense that doesn't really play that great of defense. Had a really bad game last game out, but was still carrying a really good usage rate. It was up near the 30% usage rate before last game. Derek White will round out. Well, sorry, not round out. Derek White at 4.9, 29 or more fantasy points in his last 3. He's played 26, 27, and 27 minutes in his last 3 games. Gets Phoenix at home. Good spot here for Derek White on that second unit. Eric Gordon at 4.6 has put up 25 and 35 in his last 2 on the road. He's played 33. He put up 33 last game. Played over 25 in his last 5 of 7. Gets a nice pace spot here against Minnesota on the road. So Eric Gordon at 4.6 I think is fine. Cam Reddish at 4.4 has played 27 or more minutes in his last 4. Over 21 fantasy points in his last 5 of 7. OKC 11, the 8th most of that small forward spot over the last 10. If you want to go there. And then finally Landry Shamet at 4.3. He's played 30 or more minutes in his last 4 straight. 18 or more fantasy points in his last 5. Over 20 in his last 4 or 5. With PG out, he's continuing to see big minutes. He starts even with PG, so it's good that PG's out. He's getting run and he's actually getting shots. Kawhi will be back tonight, but he's seen that he can coexist and still be decently productive. So if you want to punt with Shannon, I think I'm totally fine with that. Moving over to the small forward spot, Kawhi, obviously, PG is out. We know he has a massive usage rate, close to 40% without PG on the floor. Looks like Jimmy Butler is questionable and a whole slew of other Miami Heat. He's fresh off a rest day, so he should be good to go. Over 51 fantasy points in his last 4, over 60 in his last 3 or 4. So Kawhi will absolutely be in play at 10.3. Brandon Ingram at 8.3 is in play about every single night he's on the slate. 40 or more in his last 6 of 8, 34 plus minutes in his last 4. Over a 28% usage rate, and we know Denver is depleted. Marcus Morris Sr. at 6K. Toronto versus small forwards has been a thing all year. In his last 4 at home, he's played 29, 33, 25, and 33 minutes. 6 plus rebounds. In his last 4 at home, he's put up 17 or more real points in his last 4 at home as well. Been playing really good on his home floor. So Marcus Morris, if you want to go there, I'm totally fine. Chris Dunn at 5.5. Gets Sacramento at home tonight in a decently paced spot. Over 24 fantasy points in his last 3. He's put up 24, 31, and 33 in his last 3. To put that into perspective, 10 at 15 and 14 points. Over 32 minutes in his last 3. He's also grabbed 7, 5, and 3 rebounds in those 3 as well. Chris Dunn continues to play big minutes at that small forward spot for the Chicago. He's playing well, and his price is fair. Glenn Robinson, 3 at 4.5K. Played last game 26 or more in his last 3 or 4. 29 plus minutes in his last 4 or 5. Gets TJ Warren defense, which is something we really like at home. And then finally, if you want to punt, Damian Dotson at 3.7 is just something to look at. He has played 27, 21, and 26 minutes in his last 3. 23 and 24 fantasy points in his last 2. Getting good run for the Knicks, so if you want to look there, I'm totally fine. Going over to the power forward spot, Domantas Sabonis at 8.6, 49.3 fantasy points last game. He's now put up 49 or more in his last 3 of 5. It's Sabonis. He's really good. I don't really have to extend too much. Julius Randle at 8K obviously gets a good matchup here at home against against Toronto. Sorry, it's a good matchup. 34 more minutes in his last 3 or 4. He's put up over 35 fantasy points in his last 11 of 12. Over 43 in his last 4 of 7 at home. So Julius Randle is a good look tonight. On the flip side, Pascal Siakam has kind of come back into his own. He's only 7.7 tonight. Put up 44 fantasy points last game in 34 minutes. New York allowing the 4th most of that power forward spot over their last 10. Excuse me. So Siakam obviously is in play. LaMarcus Aldridge at 7.5. Phoenix is allowing the most fantasy points to that power forward spot over their last 10. He put up 36 against Phoenix at Phoenix 2 games ago. He's put up 37 or more in his last 2 at home. It's a good spot here for LaMarcus Aldridge at home. Put up, I think, 59 fantasy points last game. So, yeah, LaMarcus Aldridge is playing really well. Danilo Gallinari at 6.8, 45, 34, 33, 48 in his last 4 at home. Gets Atlanta at home tonight. Nemanja Bjelica at 6.7. We've talked about him a couple days straight. Now with the Kings having Marvin Bagley out as well, he should continue to play 33-plus minutes. He's seen 29 or more minutes in his last 7. 33 or more fantasy points in his last 6 of 7. Chicago allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to that power forward spot over their last 10, so it's a good spot. Jaren Jackson Jr. at 6.6, I think will go overlooked against Detroit, who's allowed decent amounts of points to their power forward spot since losing Blake Griffin. He's put up 30 or more fantasy points in his last 8 of 10. Been really good on the road in some spots. So, JJR, yeah, I'm totally fine with Jaren Jackson Jr. Zion, do you think he's going to get more than 18 minutes? Obviously, Denver is depleted. Gets him at home tonight. If you want to play Zion, he put up 33 fantasy points in 18 minutes last game. That's totally up to you. Jeremy Grant on the flip side at 6K, 34, 38.3 in his last 2. He's played 32, 33, and 35 minutes in his last 3. Now they're also without Mason Plumlee. Jeremy Grant's position is more secure than it ever has been with Paul Millsap out as well. Markieff Morris at 4.8, 27 minutes last game, 30.3 fantasy points, 29 or more fantasy points in his last 3 or 4. He's been playing well in, playing basically the starting role for the power forward spot for the Pistons. Oh, man, sorry. James Johnson is interesting at 4K. If you didn't know it, he put up 40 fantasy points the 2 games ago whenever Jimmy Butler sat. In the event that Jimmy Butler sits again with either Kendrick Nunn or Goran Dragic or all 3, James Johnson could really be an interesting play off of, at a really low price. We know he has upside. He can do a little bit of everything. He put up 22 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, and 2 blocks in that game. So keep that one in mind if those guys happen to sit. Moving over to the center spot, Karl Anthony Towns at 10.2 versus Houston. Loves playing Houston and has had some really big games against them. He's put up over 50 fantasy points in his last 2. He's played 31 and 35 minutes, so really encouraging for Karl Anthony Towns. Nikola Jokic at 9.7, put up a triple-double last game. He's went over 51 fantasy points in his last 3 or 4. 32, 44, 34, and 34 minutes in his last 4 is also very encouraging, playing big minutes. Gets the Pelicans really nice pace tonight, so really like the spot for Jokic. DeAndre Ayton has been playing really well. 8.5K, 48 2 games ago against San Antonio at home. San Antonio is allowing the 10th most fantasy points to that center spot over their last 10. He's played 31 or more minutes in his last 5, and he's went for 48 or more fantasy points in his last 3 or 4. So Ayton's been playing really well. They've been dealing with some injuries as well, with Aaron Baines and company. So that one's pretty interesting. John Collins at 8.4. Obviously, if Steven Adams sits again, this is going to be a really good spot for him. 36 minutes last game, 67 fantasy points, 36 and 37 minutes in his last 2. They have to have Collins, especially if Trae Young sits. Bam Adebayo is going to be my roster monster. Let me repeat that. Bam Adebayo is going to be the roster monster. We're going to get a really good bounce back game against. We're going to get a really good bounce back game here. It's a good spot. The Clippers are allowing the most fantasy points to that center spot over their last 10 games. We know that they've struggled against the center spot all year long. 40 or more in his last 5 of 7, and he just had a really bad game last game. Killed everybody's lineup, so I don't think anybody's going to go back to him tonight, but we are. Clint Capella at 7.6. Obviously, he also likes to play against Karl Anthony Towns. He's put up 35 or more in his last 7 of 9 games. Clint Capella at 7.6 is always the guy that never gets looked at. Jonas Valanciunas at 7.2. Detroit's allowing the 5th most of that center spot over their last 10. He's went for 43 or more in his last 3 of 5, 44, 53, 34, and 38 in his last 4 on the road. Valanciunas is also in a good spot. Derek Favors at 5.9 if you want to go there. I think I'm fine against Denver. Nerlens Noel at 5.1. Atlanta allowing the 2nd most of that center spot over their last 10. Obviously, if Adams sits, played 30 minutes last game, put up 27.3 fantasy points, has now put up 26 or more fantasy points in his last 3. So obviously Noel will be in play if Adams sits again. Marc Gasol is very cheap at 4.9. New York is allowing the 7th most of that center spot over their last 10. He's played 23 or more minutes in his last 3 or 4. He's put up 24 or more fantasy points in his last 3 or 4. He also had a 30-pointer and a 43-pointer in those 4 as well. So keep Marc Gasol in, keep him in the back of your mind. He's really cheap. He's playing decent minutes, and he's put up good numbers. And then last but not least, Dwayne Dedmon at 4.6 with Marvin Bagley sitting again. He played 31 minutes last game, put up 30 fantasy points. They don't have Bagley. They don't have Holmes. He's going to have to play again. He's 4.6, and he's playing Chicago. We know Chicago has not been good against the center spot. So, Dwayne Dedmon obviously will be a look as well. That rounds it out, guys. That is your Friday edition of the Quick Bricks NBA DFS podcast. Nice Big Ten game slate. Look very forward to talking to you guys about it later on. Enjoy your Friday.